Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Mem Gimel in Mesechet Sota, and we learned today for Ilui Neshama of Moshe Shapiro's father, David Tzvi ben Reuven, and we also learned for Afur Shalema for Elazar ben Reuma and Yosef Ezriel ben Chaim Michal. So we're at the Mishnah on Mem Gimel Merav. Dibra Shotum, the parsha in when they go out to war, and you have the Mashuach Milchama, the one who is anointed to give morale to the troops, to speak to the troops. He starts off, he's a Kohen. He was a Kohen especially pointed for that. But he says part of it, and then many of the officers, call them policemen, officers, they spoke to the people too. And that's all recorded in the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, in Dvarim, it says when you go out to war, it says that you don't be afraid of them. And the Kohen says to the V'amar Aleim, the Kohen comes here, speaks to them and says, don't be afraid, God is with you. That's the first part. But then when he gets into the details of who is exempt from going to the war, various people who just built a house, we'll talk about that, people just got engaged, they didn't get married, etc. They're the Shotrim speak to the people. The Gemara will explain in detail who says what the Kohen says and what the Shotrim says. Who is the man? Anybody here who just built a new house and he didn't dedicate it yet? He goes home. You go out. You go back. Now we'll see he doesn't actually go all the way home, but he's exempt from the war, from fighting. Now it says Yashab Beisa built a new house. Is it only a house? See, the Mishnah goes in detail. He built a base, not only a regular house for dwelling, even a house for storing straw, a base hatefen, a house for straw, meaning a storehouse. Base bucker, a barn. Base eitzem, a woodshed. Base otzes, or a place where they kept grain and oil and wine, things like that. Any of those things is a house. If you built any of those things and you haven't dedicated yet, you're exempt from the fighting. Whether you bought it, whether you built it, rather, whether you bought it, you inherited it, whether you received it as a gift, however you got it, you built it, you bought it, you inherited it, or you got it as a gift. All those things are included, and you are excluded from the fighting, as we'll see. You don't actually go all the way home. You go into, you're like a behind the scenes supplier, meaning you do in the army, it's not just the people who fight in the front, it's also the people who man the supply lines to make sure they have food and equipment, etc. So that's what they do.
You get this, you got this a week before the war, a month before the war?
That's a good question. So we saw yesterday that it's as they go out to the war is the boundary. The Kohen speaks to them first at the boundary, and then also again as they're about to start the war, as they're about to go out to war. So yeah, it's whatever time it takes. He first spoke to them at the boundary before they saw the enemy, and later on as they're about to approach the front, whatever time it was. Also, the pasuk goes on to say, not only built a house, but if you planted a vineyard and you haven't yet been machal, what does that mean? You haven't redeemed it. You have the first 3 years is arla, and the fourth year it's called neter avai or kerem avai, depending on if it's a tree or a kerem, and you have to redeem the produce, take the money up to Shalim and eat it there like Meiser Sheni. So if you haven't completed 4 years, Ochel means if you haven't completed 4 years, meaning the first 3 years you can't eat it, the fourth year you take to Shalim. If you haven't done that, you also go back. Whether you planted a kerem, whether it was a kerem has to be a kerem, it's got to have at least 5 vines planted or 5 trees, as you see in the diagram in Rashi, in that formation. That you have to have 5, whether it's a vineyard, literally a vineyard, or whether it's 5 trees, as long as it's trees that produce fruit. Even if it's 5 different species, it's all included. It's all considered a kerem, and you're exempt. Whether you planted it, whether you bent it in. There's 2 ways you can plant a tree with seeds, or you can take another tree, bend it over into the ground, and more will grow from there. Or whether you grafted one tree into another tree, we'll talk about a new one and an old way tree. All those is considered planting. Whether you bought it, whether you inherited it, or you get it as a gift, just like we saw by the house. So it applies to any kind, not just a vineyard. It applies to any time that you had 5 trees that produce food, fruit-bearing trees, or 5 chameshes aminan if he had 5 different species. The chameshes aminan, all these things, all these things, 5 different species of trees, they all are included and give you an exemption. And it goes on. Says who got engaged and didn't get married yet. Echad Amaris is Absula, whether he got engaged to a virgin, Echad Amaris is Amana, whether an Almana, Afilu Shmeres Yavam. Even if his brother died with no children and his wife is what's called the Shemeres Yavam Tim, as we've learned, right? So that's also, he's standing in line there. And we'll see, even if he heard that his brother, who was already in the war, died. He heard that his brother died and there was no children, he's automatically engaged, so to speak, to his sister-in-law, to his brother's wife. Choser, all these people, Choser Ubolo, comes up and he comes there. Kol Elu Shoman Divrei HaKohen Marach HaMachama. All these people hear the words of the Kohen who is giving the war regulations, and they return. Umasapkin Mayim Amazon. They supply food and water and food to the troops. And they fix the roads so that the tanks in those days, wagons, whatever they had, can go on the roads, and as they do public works to enable the war effort. So that's what these people do. The people who either built a home of some sort, planted of some sort, or got engaged. Let's say, though, the following people, we made rules. We said it doesn't have to be a house. It could be a storehouse. It could be a shed, whatever. But the following people don't go back. They're not exempt. Who are they? Let's say you just built a gatehouse, for the guard. Achsadra, a portico, that's got a cover but doesn't have 4 walls. Peset, a porch. That's not good enough. That's not considered good. That's not considered a house. Or let's say you only planted 4 trees, 4 fruit-bearing trees, or even 5 trees that don't bear fruit. That doesn't count. Those don't exempt you. Or machzugushaso. Let's say you take your wife back. You take your wife back. You divorced her, and now you're engaged to her again, right? So that's not. It's got to be something new. Like you have something new, you get a chance to pardon?
Yeah.
Oh, good point. Because they were expected to learn while they were soldiers. Remember, Yeshua was admonished for not learning at night while he was holding a war. Very good point. So that's not good. Amana l'kohen gadol. Now, the Masu simply it's not a new wife. It's got the same old wife. You're just taking her back. Or the following cases don't go back because they're really forbidden marriages. All those things are not really permitted, so that doesn't exempt you. Let's say you rebuilt the house, remodeled the house, you bought a house and you wrecked it, but you built it on the exact same area. You didn't add any new area to it. You just rebuilt the house. That also does not exempt you. In the Sharon area, it was considered the ground was very soft, and if you built a brick house there, you'd have to redo it every few years. That also doesn't count. Lo yachozer. Elu Shanes doesn't come in. So we've learned there are exemptions. What are those people who are exempt to? They go back and they become suppliers for the army, right? That's what they do. And then there are people who are not exempt at all. Let's say it's a forbidden marriage, or they didn't really build a house or whatever. Elu Shanes doesn't come in. The following people don't even go out to hear the words of the Kohen. They don't go out to hear the rules and the war regulations and who's exempt. They don't have to go out at all. Who are they? Elu Shanes doesn't come, but then they never leave the house. Let's say he built a house and he dedicated it, but he wasn't there for a year. The rule is that if you build a house, you're entitled to Lodar. If you built the house and you've dedicated it, but you didn't live in it a year, you're totally exempt. You don't even go out to be a supplier. Not the Kamachalelo. You planted a vineyard and you redeem it in the 4th year, but you didn't have a full 4th year there. Or or you married your betrothed, and Akonis Asivimto, and you haven't had a full year with her. Shenever, the pasuk says later on, Naki Yeleveso. You gotta spend a year with your wife, and you're exempt from going to the army at all. First, you have to take care of your wife and your new vineyard and your house, etc. Shanach, Naki Lebeso Shanachas, Lebeso. It says Naki Lebeso Shanachas. Lebeso is Abeso. It's his house. He's got to have an opportunity to live in his house for a year. Yeh Zekarmo. the word of yia, because these words are extra, you could have said it in a more abbreviated way. Is a yia zekarmo his karam's got to take care of that. Got to be able to have fruits from that for a year. That's literally his wife. Asher lakach lahavi esivimto, even a yavama, even though it's not, it's his wife, his yavama is not new to the family, but it's new to him also. Aim must speak of these people. Aim must speak of my also. They don't do anything. They stay home, take care of the house, the wife, etc. They don't come supplies. They don't fix the roads. They don't do anything for the war effort. It says that they speak their own. In other words, it's not something that they heard from the Kohen. It says then it says the Shotrim will add on and they'll say more things. Those are the things that they add on. Because again, in the parsha, it first talks about the Kohen speaking to them. And Shema Yisrael, you're going to come to the army, you're going to war, don't be afraid, God is with you. Then the Shotrim say, who's the man who's built the house and hasn't dedicated it? Who is the person who planted a tree or a karam vineyard? And that's all what says the Shotrim say that. Then it says, then they additionally, they continue to speak to the people and they say, who is afraid? Who is a person who is afraid? So we'll see in tomorrow's daf, there'll be a machlokas. Is that afraid because they're simply scared to fight or because they're afraid because of the averis that they had? Okay, but it says v'yasu. So that's things that they said on their own. So therefore, the first part, the dibra shotim, is mashma stuff, not that they said on their own, but that they heard from the Kohen. So I read from Shlatzim. Hamani mekayim v'dibra shotim, v'dibra meshuch muchamad kosem daber. The Kohen speaks and they proclaim it to the other people. Okay, it says Kohen medaber shotim mashmiya. Kohen says those words. It's about who is the one who built the house and Karam, etc., and betrothed the wife. Who are those people? That's the Kohen says it, and the Shotrim, the officers, they proclaim it to the people. Tani Chada, one brisa said, Kohen medaber shotim mashmiya. Like we just said, the Kohen speaks and they proclaim it. Tani Yidach, Kohen medaber kom mashmiya. The Kohen speaks and he proclaims it to everybody. Tani Yidach, shotim medaber shotim mashmiya. The Shoter is the one who speaks and he's the one who proclaims it. So we talk about three things. I'm by it's very simple. Okay, it said the first part where he says the Kohen approaches them and says, don't be afraid, don't be frightened, don't get scared. God is with you. The Goyim come with the koach of Bnei Adam, like we saw yesterday, with Goliath, etc. We come with God. So that's the Kohen says everything. He talks to the people and he proclaims it to everybody. The first part about who took a new wife or who built the house, etc. The Kohen says the words, and the Shoter proclaims those words to everybody else. The last part, the Kohen, that the Shoter continues on, there he talks about who is simply afraid to go out to war because he's afraid of his sins or he's just afraid of battle. That's where the Shotrim speak it on their own and they proclaim it without the Kohen involved. We just said in the Mishnah that not only if you built it, but even if you bought it. So let's say who not only and that's only says it's Ashabana who built. How do I know that if he bought it, if he inherited it or he's given it, I don't know, Tamalomer Miha Ish could have said Mi Bana, it says Miha Ish, Asher Bana bias. Ain Liela bias, Menayim Rabos, how do I that's only a house, a regular house. How do I to include a house for straw, a storage place, base a kabuk or a barn, base a woodshed, base oasis where they store grains and oil and wine? Built anything. Because it could have just said it in a more abbreviated way. So from Ya'ish we say however you got it. And Asher Bana teaches me whatever you build. As long as it's a building with 4 walls and a roof, that's good enough. Maybe you include even a gatehouse or a portico or a merpeset, which aren't really Talmud Lomar, bias. It's got to be asma bias royal deer, just like it's fit for living in. Afkol royal deer. Those other places are not not fit for living. Lesmiak bias kashmo. He disagrees with the Mishnah. He argues. He says no. A house is a house. Nothing else. Not a woodshed. Not a barn. Nothing else. A house is a house. If it's not a house, you're not exempt. Then it says lo chanach. Could have said velo chanacho. You didn't dedicate it. Could have just said velo chanach. Why did it say velo chanacho? If you stole the house, you're not exempt. Chanacho, a regular house that you built or you bought or you received, but if you stole it, that's excluded. This goes against Rabbi Yossi Glili on tomorrow's daf. Rabbi Yossi Glili already says that the one who is afraid of his Averas is exempt. Well, if he stole the house, that's a pretty good Avera. So maybe that should be included. It's already included in Rach Leiva. Why do you need Chanachot to exclude if you stole the house? You already exclude because you have sins in your hand, right? So so you'd already be included for that. So he should go back because of Yorei Lach Leiva. He doesn't have to go back because he stole that house. He should be excluded. Now, if you say that Lo Chanachot, if he stole the house, he's not exempt. But if he stole the house, he should be exempt because he's afraid of his Averis. So my field somebody else like Lili could go into other tshuva. Okay, let's say he did tshuva, so he doesn't have Averis in his hands anymore, right? How did he do tshuva if he still has the house? The Abdami, he paid for it. Okay, he did tshuva, he stole it first, now he paid for it. So there's no more Avera. So he's not going to be exempt because of that, right? But he's not going to be exempt because of that. But he is exempt because he stole the house. We say, God, if he paid for it, he bought it. Well, he should go back. He should be exempt because he bought the house, because he bought a house. Since it originally came to his hands because he's not exempt. He's only exempt if he got it legitimately originally. For example, he built it, he bought it, he inherited it, or he was given it as a gift. But if he originally got it because he stole it, then he's not exempt because of that. He's not exempt because of that, and he's not exempt because of Averis because he did tshuva. So here's an example: a guy who did Averis is exempt. The guy who did tshuva is not exempt from the army. Those are the rules. Not all the rules of exemption make sense always, right? We just go by the rules, like you say. Me not the kerem, right? In our day we were exempt in the American Army too. What was it, a 4F or something, or they always had the clergy exempt. That was the thing that came later on. 4D, yeah. All right. Umiya ish asher nata kerem. Who was the person who planted the kerem? So just like we said, a house, according to the Tanakh, our mission includes more than just a house. Same thing with a kerem. If he planted it, let's say he bought it, inherited, or received was given 9 times Malomar, Umiya'ish, again, just like Miya'ish by Banabayas, that Miya'ish also includes these kind of things too. It's only a vineyard. How do I know to include if he had like a kerem, but not a vineyard, not with vines, but rather with 5 species of trees? I feel mishar, even with different species. Hamalomar, asher nata, anything that he planted. Maybe if you would include, even if you only had 4 kinds of trees, of fruit-bearing trees, or chamisha and stock, or 5 trees that are not fruit-bearing. Tamalomar kerem. It's got to be something like a kerem. A kerem is 5 vines, so it could be also 5 trees as long as they're fruit-bearing. No, only means a vineyard. Just like Rav Meir said, it only refers to a house, a real house, not a shed or a woodshed or a barn or anything like that. So here also he says a kerem means dafke kerem. Lo chilo v'lo chilo. Could have said asher lo chilelo. Why did it say lo chilel? Prat l'mavrach l'markav. So here the Brisa says excludes if you bend over the tree or bend over or graft it. That excludes that. Okay, so it doesn't mean Yaakov came from Mashmal, but what does lo chil mean? That lo chil means excluding if you bent over a tree or a vine, or if you grafted it. You're not exempt. You're not exempt. Now, Mishnah said, Mishnah said, not only if you plant it, but if you bend over or you graft it, it is included. So our Mishnah seems to differ from the Brisa. Our Mishnah is speaking about where it's the same species, where you're allowed to graft right? You're allowed to graft the same species with one another. You're allowed to. What you do is you take let's say an old tree, and you take a shoot from a young tree and you put it in there, and then it becomes like part of the old tree. So if it's Harkovas Isser, that's when it's 2 different species where you're not allowed to mix it. There, since you're doing an Isser, just like when a Kohen Gadol marries an Almana, there you're not exempt. Here too, when you did an Isser, you're not exempt based on that Isser. So Harkovas Isser, Harkovas Heter. Higher Harkovas Heter. What's the case where you grafted something and you say, if you grafted it and it's mutter to graft because it's the same species, you're exempt from the army. If you're talking about a young tree with a young tree, meaning it's not 4 years old yet. So technically, what do you say if you grafted, you had tree number 1 and you grafted number 2 into number 1? So you say if you grafted it, you're also exempt. But if they're both young trees, you're exempt because of number one, as we learned before. If you haven't had 4 years of the tree, the first 3 years you can't eat it. The 4th year you take it to Yerushalayim and eat the produce there, or you tote it, you redeem it for money, you take the money and buy food with it Yerushalayim. So there you go back because of if they're both young trees, number one and number two. So why do you say that if you planted number two and number one, you grafted it, you're exempt? You're exempt because of number one, which is also a young tree. El Alda Baskena. Elamai must be that you took number two as a young tree and you grafted that into number one. The young one is Batla Skena. Once you take a shoot of number two and you put that in number one, and number one is an old tree that's already past the 4 years, so it becomes part of the old tree. And so therefore you shouldn't be exempt. Or why should you be exempt now? The young tree, the shoot or the branch of number two that you put in number one is now part of number one. And number one is an old tree, and you're not exempt for that. We're talking about a young tree with a young tree. Let's say you planted a young tree, but you didn't plant it for fruit. You planted it for a siag, for a fence. You had a breach in your wall. So what you do is you planted a couple of trees there to fill the breach, or you planted it for beams, for construction. So there's no din of arla there. So that's what we say. If number one was was a young tree, but it was planted not for fruits, then it's not exempt because of that. It doesn't have din of arla, and there's no din of finishing for 4 years. So you're not exempt because of that, because it's not really for fruit. But you are exempt for number two. You grafted number two into number one. Number one was planted for a fence or for beams, but number two, the part you grafted in, you meant to use as fruits. So then you're exempt because of that. So the Gemara now says, why do you say if you planted number two was a young tree in number one, you grafted into number one, it's bottled to number one. So why shouldn't number two, if you planted a young one in another young one, and the number one was for timber, right, or for a fence, so number two should also be bottled. If you say you planted a young number two in number one, it's bottled to number one, and there's no din arla even on the number two part. So the same thing over here. You planted number two and number one, and number one is has no din of arla or revive because it's planted for wood or for a fence, whatever. It's not planted for fruit. So number two should also be bottled there. The answer is it's different. When you planted number two and number one was an old tree, it's it. That's it. It's part of number one. There's no din arla. You can't change your mind. It's already done. It's part of number one. But over here, the reason number one is potter when it's a young tree, when number two and number one are both young, the reason number one is potter is because you're planning to use it for wood. Let's say you change your mind. I originally planted for wood. Now I see it's got good fruits. I'm going to use it for fruits. You can change your mind. So therefore, because it really is for fruits, except you were going to use it for wood. So you could change your mind. And even though you didn't originally plan on using it for fruits, it could still be chayav in fruits later on. Therefore, we don't say that number two is bottled to number one because number one itself is subject to your change of mind. Let's say just like a tree that grew by itself, you didn't plant it. There's not an olam and chayav marla. Even though you had no intention to plant this tree for fruits because you didn't even plant the tree. It grew by itself. Sometimes trees grow by themselves. Seeds fall and fruits grow by itself. So therefore, even though you didn't have original kavanah, you still chayav. Okay, so that's his answer. That's what we're speaking about over here. Our cover, where in our mission we say where you grafted number two into number one, you're exempt because of that. That's when number two was a young tree. It was grafted into number one, which is another young tree, but you weren't exempt because of number one, because number one was built for fruits, and number two was built for wood, not for fruits. Was planted for wood, not for fruits. And number two is not bottled to number one because number one you could change your mind on number one also. But look, when we come to Shaitan, why don't you say a simple answer? Why don't you say that the reason we had to, our mission tells us that you're exempt because of the grafted tree number two is because number one belonged to Reuven and number two belonged to Shimon, right? It's a vineyard that belonged to two people, right? The high hodder adidei, the high hodder day. Reuben goes back because of his tree number one, or tree or his vine, whatever, and Shimon goes back as number two. Belongs to two shutfin, it doesn't work. If you have a camp belongs to two, it's only if you own it as an individual. And Rashi says over here, right, because well, this Rashi's on the next one. Let me go on first. Kerem Shashei, in other words, the kerem belongs to two people, even if it's brand new and it hasn't had 4 years there. You don't go back. How's different? Let's say 5 brothers. A man had 5 brothers. There were 6 boys. They all from one father. And 5 boys went out to war, and they all died. Or one died. I'm sorry, not they all went out to war. There were 5 brothers, let's say. One of the brothers was killed in the war. Now what happens to his wife? No children. Falls even to one of the other 4 brothers. All 4 brothers are exempt. He said in the Mishnah, Shmer Siyavim is the example. All 4 brothers. She's only going to marry one of them, right? So over here, how is this different? You say over here, if a kerem is owned by 2 people, there's no exemption for the war. They all go back, even though she's only married one. And so she might marry each, one of them. Every one of them might indeed be the one, the of them, who she marries. And if she marries him, then she's only married to him. But over here, where 2 people own a kerem, it's nobody individual's kerem. And here's what the Rashi I wanted to point out. Rashi, right where the lines get narrow, Rashi on the left side, there's no vine in the vineyard which each of them don't, where each of them have where both of them don't have a chelik. In other words, every vine, when it's belonging to shutfin, every vine belongs to both of them. It's not like you could say there's shutfin in something, you own it. If we own a house together, it's not like I own this half and you own that half. We each own the whole thing. And the same thing over here, if you each own a kerem, they each own the whole thing together. In the case of a man dying in war and he had 4 brothers, okay, each one has the potential to marry her. And when each one whoever marries her, it'll be his wife. But over here, when you have a kerem that's owned by shutfin, both own the whole thing. And therefore, there's the exemption. The exemption is only for individuals who own something, a house, a wife, etc. I'll tell you that it's very simple. You wanted to know why in our mission we say that if you graft or you bend over, you are exempt, and the Bryce said you're not. We're speaking about over here, where you graft a tree with vegetables. Okay, there's no issur. In other words, the reason why you say over here, not the reason why you say, but the reason why you say over here that you're exempt because of you're exempt against tree because there were vegetables over here. You didn't graft a tree with another tree, so you could say you should be exempt because of the first tree, because of tree number 1. You drafted with vegetables. So is that considered climb though? Goes like this. Tanam Shemuel says, Ish Baraku says that that's not considered climb. Chacham say that's also, that's climb. You're not allowed to do that. But like the first sheet that you're allowed to do that, okay. So Yerek has no halacha of 4 years, right? Of 3 years of Arla, etc. It's only trees. So you want to know why? How is it possible that you're exempt because of tree number 2 and not because of tree number 1? You don't have to give this answer and say, well, tree number 1 was planted for wood or for a fence. It wasn't really for fruits. The answer is wasn't a tree. It was vegetables. And therefore, there's no exemption because of number 1, only because of number 2. That's the answer. Pardon? Yeah, you take a shoot of a tree and you put that into a vegetables. You grafted that into a vegetable patch, into some vegetables.
What's it supposed to do?
Oh, it'll grow. Whatever it'll grow, it'll grow. It'll grow. That's what he said over here. Market closer, but market Elam Bierik, the low boiler matter, Mishum Kama, Imtamar Min Bisha, Ayatham Min Bishain Amino, it goes like the sheet that walls that's not, there's no climb when it comes to a tree with vegetables. He says very simple. You want to know who the author of the Bryce who says that you're not exempt because of harkava, because of either bending or because of harkava, because of grafting. It's Rav Yaakov. Lo Amar Rav Yaakov Hasam Karen Kamash. But did he say before a kerem is only a kerem, not trees? Hachanami neta kamashmo. Notea ein mavachlo. Only planted. Just like Rav Yaakov said, a house is a house, not a shed, not a barn. And the same thing he said, it's only a vineyard, not trees. Same thing over here. It's only planting, not grafting, not bending or grafting. Now, this last answer to explain the difference between our mission, which says that you're exempt for bending or grafting versus the brisa which says that you're not exempt. So we said we get different answers. One was when it's mutter, you're allowed to graft. One's where it's also because you had two different. Bryce was speaking about we had two different species. We gave other answers that speaking about where you did a young one with a young one, but the first one was for wood. We gave this other answer. And we said now that it's speaking about we grafted a tree with vegetables. That's what his answer was, and that was the name of Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael. Said the name of Yochanan because of Glazim Yaakov. So here's another member that has nothing to do with our topic. But it's another thing. Rav Dimi said in the name of Yochanan, who said in the name of Blazim Yaakov. Yes, Rav Dimi, Rav Yochanan, Mishum Blazim Yaakov. Yalda Pusa Mitefach Chaybar. Let's say you had a young vine, right? That never grows. It's like a stunted kind of a vine that never grows. Even 10 years later, it doesn't grow. So it only goes up to a tefach. You have to give arla kol shnoseh. Now it doesn't necessarily mean right whether it's a vine or a tree, whatever. A young sapling that never grows, it only goes up to less than a tefach. So you always have to give arla. Why? It's more than 4 years later. The mischazik abashasi, because it looks like it's only a year old. People will think if you don't give, if you eat the fruits, people think you're eating arla. So because of appearances, marasayan, you have to it's chayv arla all the years. In other words, you can never eat it. That's only if you have 2 and 2 and 1 as a tail, meaning the diagram that Rashi has on Amar Aleph, we have the 5. Aval kula karam, but if the whole karam is that way, so people know this guy has a stunted karam and the whole thing, and people will know, and they'll say that he's got stunted of In other words, because people, if he sees year after year after year, the stuff never grows, they'll all know that it's a bad, that's the kind of stunted karam that he has, and you're not chayv and arle after the 3 years and the 4th year of revival. Another thing that he said, if you're within 4 amas of a dead body, you can't say Kriyashma. You can't learn Torah either. It's like you're making fun of you're shaming the one who made the rush. If you see a crippled person or a poor person or a miskin and he doesn't have anything, and you make fun of him, you're actually shaming the one who made him, God, because God made him. So don't make fun of him. And that's like the rush. That's why also when you go to a funeral, you put your tzitzis inside. If your tzitzis are hanging out, you put your tzitzis in. You don't learn within 4 amas of a mess because it's called loeg the rush. We're at the second of the wide lines of the Gemara. I told you guys, I had this case when I was in yeshiva. You have a stepdaughter who grows up among your sons. The man had wife number 1, he had a bunch of boys. Then he took wife number 2, and she had a daughter there, right? Or the same thing with adopted kids. And she can't marry the brothers. People will think that he's marrying. If he marries his stepsister, it's not really related to him. A stepsister, not a half sister, a stepsister. You can marry. Says you shouldn't marry your stepsister because people will think he's marrying his sister. Below, that's not really the truth. Kala islu lemilsa. People know. That's what people don't know, but people know. Like I told you, there was a guy in yeshiva, Acholder, he was one of 7 adopted kids, and he married his sister. Let's say a poor person is entitled to take leket shikapeh in the field. Let's say he took it, and that's potter from Meiser. But let's say he gathered it up, and he had a granary out of it. He made a granary out of it. Meiser, he has to give Meiser from that, not because he's chayv Meiser min Torah. He's potter Meiser min Torah. It's like Matanasim is potter, but the reason is people will think that he actually grew it. But that stuff he's in the field, so people don't know. People think he actually grew this stuff. But if he's in the city where he gathered it little by little until he had a grain, some people will know that he brought it in little by little. He was a poor person, and he doesn't have to give Meiser. Again, it's only drop on. These things are already not Ravdimi, but it's still Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Elazar Yaakov. Yalda plus mitefach ein mekadesh ram. Let's say you had a small tree, or a small vine. Again, the small vine that doesn't grow a tefach. It's not mekadesh, means it doesn't aser grains that grew with it. In other words, that's klayim. If you take vine seeds and you mix that with grain seeds, that ruins the klayim. But if it's less than a tefach, it doesn't. That's again if you look at it as a vineyard where we had 2 and 2 and 1. Avol karam. If the whole karam was this way, makdish, because people won't know and people will think that that ruins the whole thing. Here Rashi says that we're going with the shita that that Minatorah, a vine only prohibits two kinds. It's got to be either hemp or beans. Only if that's only in a Torah. The other one's only the Rabbanan. So here the Rabbanan said that if it's a small one like that, a small luach yalda, it's a stunted kind of a vine, doesn't ruin the zroim and it doesn't become klein. But if the whole kerem was that way, then it would ruin it. Then then it's more choshv, he says. Because the whole vine, the whole vineyard is that way, then it would prohibit it. Last thing, meis tofes arba amos l'tumah. In other words, if you're within 4 amos of a dead body, you're tummy. Based of us arba amos l'tumah, right? Chum gazru shia meis metame. Not only normally a meis on tummy if you touch him or if you're a mile over him, but here he says even if you're within 4 amos, people should not get near it. So the Rabbanan makes it. Tanatun, we see a brisa that brings a proof to this. Chatzar cover home, but let's say you have a chatzar a kever. Kever in those days were in caves, and you had a chatzar leading up to it. And so if you stand in the chatzar, you're tar. Bishami says if the chatzar is 4 amos, then and that's clearly separated from the graves, which were in sepulchres and dug into the cave, then you're okay. So even if you just had 4 tfachim, if the chatzar right outside of it was 4 tfachim, that's good enough to exempt you, and you're not tamei. If the opening of the cave is above, but if from the side, but he says you need armor. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? It's just the opposite. Klapi, where are you going? This Adarab, Minatzad. When it's from the side, midriff and up, you can easily step away when you go out. In other words, without becoming tamei, because the opening is on the side. Milamala, but if the opening is from on top, EF Shalomile, when you jump out, when you get out of the cave, as you get up, it's hard to protect yourself. Parts of your body or let your limbs could be mahil, can overshadow the graves. The other way around. If the opening is on the side, then Beis Hillel says 4 tvachim is enough. But if it's above, that's a chatzar next to a kever. The Messiah because it's got clear partitions. It's got the avomais ba'almatafis. This is the proof that we're talking about. The proof that Rav Meir Shapiro that meis tofes arba amos is from here. Because by a chatzar, a kever, if you have a cave where they put where they put dead people in the cave, they bury them there, and you have a chatzar there. So the chatzar is separated from the graves. But a meis ma'almas, tam a meis, it's out in the field, whatever that's bare, wherever he is, then it's 4 amos. Of a meis ma'alma toughest, it grabs 4 amos according to everybody, even according to Beis Hillel, 4 amos around a dead body is your tamei, if you're within 4 amos of the dead body. All right, we'll pick him here tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.